Hello, I'm Propane Salesman. I love Evil Dead, and I like video games. So naturally I'd be interested when there's a video game about Evil Dead. Since 2019-ish, up to when I finished my Evil Dead Iceberg video, I was especially obsessed with Evil Dead. I was also playing a shit ton of Mortal Kombat 11, which had leaks suggesting series protagonist Ash Williams was gonna be in it. I was all about that, but long story short, that never actually happened. I had a massive itch for a good Evil Dead game, and no good way to scratch it at the time. So, when I saw the announcement trailer of Evil Dead the Game from the Game Awards 2020, I was immediately bought in. So much so that I went 50-50 with my brother and bought the Fancy Pants $200 Ultimate Collector's Edition. I filmed my unboxing and uploaded it to YouTube before I ever even started making high-effort videos. Fast forward to when this game came out on Friday the 13th in May of 2022. As soon as I got home from work that day, I was on that shit. In case you aren't aware, Evil Dead the Game was a 4v1 multiplayer game where you had 4 players as survivors, with choices of characters from throughout the Evil Dead series, fighting waves of deadites and completing objectives, as well as 1 player as the Demon. The Demon was really interesting, as unlike other asymmetrical multiplayer horror games, the Demon isn't a constant physical threat. Instead, as the Demon, you're an invisible force that flies around, places traps, spawns enemies, can occasionally possess survivors to attack their teammates, possess vehicles, and eventually spawn as a boss enemy, which is the closest thing to a traditional killer role from another game. Was this the greatest game ever? Hardly. Did I still have fun with it?
Yep.
This game had a very basic gameplay loop and not a ton of content, but it scratched that Evil Dead itch. I got to play as my funny Chin Man and chop up demons with my chainsaw hand, so I was happy. Playing as the Demon was fun too. I liked the combat, the references to the franchise, and the vibe. I liked this game enough that I even eventually platinumed it. You might think, wow, this game sure looks swell, I should check it out, and try to buy it. But if you go on Steam right now and try to purchase it, what the hell? Yeah, as of April of last year, this game is no longer available for purchase. You could buy a key for it still, or a physical copy, but officially this game is gone. Even earlier than that, the game stopped receiving new content updates as early as September of 2023, with the last character added being Ash's father, Brock Williams. Literally 16 months after the game came out, what's up with that? Well, Saber Interactive, Evil Dead's developer, has never actually come out and said what the deal is, but that doesn't mean it's a total mystery. Remember near the beginning of the video when I mentioned how Ash was supposed to be in Mortal Kombat 11? That's another situation where the developers never officially acknowledged the issue, but Bruce Campbell himself, at a random Q&A at a drive-in theater, was the one to come out and say it.
Because look, the truth is very simple. Characters are kind of owned by companies, including Ash. So sometimes those companies aren't allowed to loan characters between franchises because other companies go, whoa, then you have to make a deal. If you're going to, it's like loaning out Humphrey Bogart to another studio. The studios make a deal. So it gets weird sometimes. So it might not happen only because of legal crap.
So, NetherRealm, a AAA studio, couldn't work out the rights to get Ash, which is weird because other games before and since have gotten Ash Williams as a character. Oh well. What does this have to do with Evil Dead the game specifically? Well, that example was just to demonstrate how much of a legal mess the Evil Dead series is. To make it even more blatant, look at this title screen. Assuming you're still awake, you've probably noticed how many different companies have a finger in this pie. Go look at any other game's title screen. It has the publisher, the developer, maybe the engine. In fact, look at other licensed games. Publisher, developer, license holder. This game has 5 different companies it had to license from. I'm pretty confident that's a big part of why this game was killed. It's happened before. A very similar incident happened with Friday the 13th, the game. The F-13 franchise had a big weird legal battle happen, which is why you see Jason Universe merchandise now instead of just Friday the 13th. In the fallout of that legal battle, the developer Ilphonic was no longer allowed to officially support that game and they had to pull the plug on it. While Evil Dead hasn't had a major legal battle like that happen, the legal rights to this franchise have been snafu'd from day one. Sam Raimi had to distribute each movie in the original trilogy under different companies, which is why he had to basically remake Evil Dead 1 as the opening for Evil Dead 2, and do the same for Evil Dead 2 with Army of Darkness. Typically, if you want to license Evil Dead, you have to pick one very specific iteration of the brand and depict only that. The best example to demonstrate this would be the comics. The majority of Evil Dead comics ever published are licensed to Army of Darkness specifically, even though you'd think they would just want to call them Evil Dead since that's what the franchise is called. Why is that? You see, if a comic was just called Evil Dead, you would only be allowed to use elements from the first movie, or maybe the reboot now, which means Ash has the Mo Howard hair and no chainsaw hand. That's why most of the time you see Ash Williams in crossover media, he's Ash from Army of Darkness and not Ash from Evil Dead. Makes sense? Maybe not, but I hope that you get my point now that Saber Interactive, a much smaller studio, being able to manage all these cables at all is an anomaly. There's 2 ways this deal could have happened. A, they used black magic from the Necronomicon, or B, they promised these guys that they would make an absurd amount of money. And while option A has a non-0% chance of being true, I lean towards B. Which brings me to the next reason why I believe this game was smothered in its cradle. Popularity. Obviously this game had its audience, as Evil Dead is a beloved series, especially among nerds. But it's unfortunately not popular enough to have its own game make a huge splash in the crowded market that is asymmetrical multiplayer games. And by that, I mean most people didn't want to stop playing Dead by Daylight to move over to Evil Dead. DBD fans don't want to actually fight the villain player in-game. They only like fighting them in the post-game chat for not following their survivor rulebook and letting them win. Boss Team Games were probably hoping they could make Dead by Daylight money. That was another problem this game always had. People couldn't stop comparing it to Dead by Daylight. I liked this game because it tried to do something unique with its brand and not just blatantly copy something more popular. But the world wasn't ready for it. Honestly, that's a problem plaguing the entire gaming industry. No publisher is content making moderately successful mid-budget games for dedicated fans anymore. Everything has to be the next Fortnite or it doesn't get made. Although now, even Fortnite is starting to crumble. So this is entirely speculation on my part, but here's what I think happened. Evil Dead didn't make as much money as they were hoping it would make. They promised it could rake in Dead by Daylight numbers, but that didn't happen, so they couldn't afford to keep the different licenses up and running, and they were forced to pull the plug. Which sucks. I will say the one saving grace this game has going for it right now is that even though the game is delisted, its dedicated servers are still up and running. So, at least as of March 2026 when I type this, you can still play Evil Dead the game. That is, assuming you can even get into a match without someone quitting.
Can't beat the original.
Which is still more that can be said for games that had way more money dumped into them. But we're on borrowed time, the servers could get shut down any day. Potentially even without warning, and this game will be lost. For all its faults, this game doesn't deserve to be lost. Evil Dead fans deserve a game that they'll always be able to come back to. There's the PS2 games, but if you don't have the original hardware or the means to emulate, then you're out of luck. If you ask me, we never should have been in this situation in the first place. As much as I like the Evil Dead game we got, I think ultimately, it shouldn't have been the game that was made. It was irresponsible for Saber and Boss Team to make a multiplayer game if they weren't certain they'd be able to support it long term. I think we should have gotten a single-player game. A decently long hack-and-slash adventure with Ash Williams that we can get a good 9 hours of fun from, and then let it sit in our library for a while until we eventually get the urge to chop up Deadites again. The combat could literally be identical to the game we actually got, and it would have been plenty of fun. The story could have been anything. It could have been a follow-up to Ash vs. Evil Dead's finale, which most people would have liked, but it could have even been something simpler and I wouldn't have been mad, like a retelling of the movies, or a self-contained Ash adventure post-Army of Darkness. Throw in some Resident Evil puzzles and fun boss fights and we've got a game. Even if this was the game we actually got, it might still eventually have gotten delisted, like has happened to many licensed games from years past. But you wouldn't need to worry about the upkeep of the dedicated servers. Like, I can still play games like Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions and Transformers Devastation because even though those games are delisted, I still own them, and don't have to worry about game servers getting shut down. There was a time after Evil Dead the game's delisting that I hoped we could still get that single-player game, but I don't think that's possible anymore, at least not in its ideal form. If you're watching this, I'm sure you've heard that Bruce Campbell has both recently been diagnosed with cancer and is taking a step back from Evil Dead. He deserves the chance to retire, as much as I would love for him to come back one more time for a new video game or animated series adaptation. Without Bruce Campbell voicing Ash, I doubt any developer would even still want to make a new Evil Dead game. And as good as the non-Ash movies still are, Ash is the face of the franchise. A game where you play as Mia or Beth just wouldn't be the same even if they would still be cool. Maybe if they find an actor who does an uncannily good impression of Bruce. Like with Indiana Jones and Troy Baker, it could work, but I won't hold my breath. In conclusion, Evil Dead the game was likely killed because it failed to meet unrealistic expectations, and they couldn't afford to keep paying the billion different companies it had to license through. We should have gotten a single-player hack-and-slash or survival horror game, but now it's too late for that to ever happen, and I'm sad. Thank you for watching, stay groovy.